Ahoy! We finally have some updates on upcoming PvP plans and what's going on next year in general. It isn't necessarily much, but there are some details that are worth talking about. So the New World team made the smart decision to pre-schedule some content over the holidays. We probably have Michael Owen to thank for that, which means we're not completely left hanging until January. We'll first look into the aspects that concern PvP and then the other upcoming changes in content. Somebody wanted to know if controller aim lock and aim assist will be enabled in PvP. They will try a couple of things in that regard, but initially there will be no lock on in PvP. You can't just steadily lock onto the same target. However, they will enable aim assist, but the tuning is not decided yet. And that will be decided based on the feedback, especially from the Season 5 PTR, and they're encouraging us to give feedback here once that is live. I already said this in a previous video, aim assist doesn't equal aim assist because there are various levels of aim assist, and weaker levels are not necessarily very noticeable, especially when you're competing with players that are using mouse and keyboard. They usually have better aim by default, that's why aim assist exists, so it's for them to find a middle ground here essentially. And since musket is no longer hit scan, you still need to factor in projectile travel, so it's not necessarily that easy. Don't panic about this until it's actually on PTR, and if it feels overpowered there, then that's the moment to panic and express that it feels like that. When asked about Crossworld Arenas, which were on last year's roadmap and are now not even announced for next year yet, they said they're staggering things, they want to do one thing at a time, as kind of build upon each other, and are planning to do it eventually and it will come in the future. David said specifically about that Arenas will be very soon on the docket after they've released the PvE group finder and Crossworld combination. I still find this strange because while the PvE aspect is obviously more complicated, when it comes to PvP we already have Outpost Rush, that is the exact same system that they would need to apply for 3v3s, and when they first announced that they're going to do Crossworld and they're starting with OPR, they said that once they have that foundation they can easily apply that to other modes. So suddenly they can't because they're doing the group finder thing with it, but that really shouldn't affect 3v3s at all. 3v3s should be a quick and easy one and done compared to what they're doing on the PvE side of things. They're arguing with the player number needed here, so I guess it's not as important for 3v3 because it's easier to find queues on your own server, but still, it seems odd to me. A very important question was why develop gamepad support instead of OPR maps, cycle hill, PvP content, and that therefore the person asking had no motivation to continue because there was no content to do. Scott responded, a ton of people are asking for controller support, maybe just not in your circle. Also that they're trying to appreciate the broad audience. Now, I would like to take a moment here to actually look at the data. Because my audience, I would say, is not heavily biased towards OPR. Sure, I am someone who somewhat favors PvP, but my content in itself is not PvP focused. I'm not someone who constantly makes OPR montages. I think my audience in general, you guys are generally just people that play New World. Or don't play New World anymore for that matter. But I made a quick poll this morning, just to see what the general sentiment of the two aspects is like compared to each other. So I asked if people only had one option, would they prefer controller support or a new OPR map? And as you can see here, there's a very, very, very clear bias in the direction of a new OPR map. I don't think Scott is lying when he says a ton of people have been asking for controller support, because even if you go with a small sample size here, out of the 460 voters, roughly around about 50 voters were voting for full controller support, so it's not something that's not in demand at all. I just don't believe the demand is anywhere near the demand for a new OPR map. I don't think what Scott is really saying here is that people are asking for controller support. I think what he wants to say but can't say yet is that people are asking for a console version, because that has been true since the start of the game. There are a lot of people who simply don't play on PC and have said that this is a game that could work well on console. Can we get this on console? He also said that it's important to add this controller support because the combat vision from the beginning was to be playable with the controller. Again, controller players absolutely exist on PC, especially with things like Steam Deck, even more so, but compared to the mouse and keyboard demographic, they are a much smaller group. So if you're doing something targeted at controller players, it's very, very likely because you want to make a console release. And again, they had other hints in previous videos and previous talks that kind of indicated the same thing. If they end up not doing a console version at this point and fluffing this controller support up as the whole big thing for the next quarter at least or more, that would honestly be almost hilariously bad, so I highly doubt that. If you're enjoying the video so far, consider subscribing and clicking the bell, and if you'd like to support me further and get early trading tips, just post another one, then you can do so on my Patreon. But Scott didn't leave us completely hanging in regards to the OPR side of things. He said, "That said, in May we're gonna have a lot to talk about, and safe to say that PvP players are going to have something that will excite them." And then at the very end of the show, they talked about why there were no more questions answered about OPR. They said as much as they like to talk about it, they're not in the position to right now, so they're not allowed to talk about it yet. And they say, "We see all the questions and fully understand that players want another OPR map. They're going to take that and compare it against other things that players want," which I'm not quite sure what they're implying here, but oh well. And then they want to make the best decision for the long-term health of the game. Now, I really hope that the whole talk about exciting stuff and everything doesn't just accumulate in next year we'll get one new OPR map. Because the OPR map that people are asking for many I think is more of a at least give us something. The OPR map isn't the hardest thing to do. It is a visually different map. It doesn't have to be a different mechanics-wise changed map, just so we have something to freshen up things a little bit. I'm pretty sure that most people would prefer more than that, a maybe OPR rework to make it better, or a completely new separate mode. A lot of people are talking about, for example, having a capture the flag mode or similar. And the new OPR map is more like players trying to bridge a gap here and saying, okay, you can make all these visual assets for various events, various other things that are going on, new dungeons and everything. Just spend some time on an OPR map in between so we can see something else for once. I personally am definitely in the boat of wanting a new PvP game mode entirely. I've never been a fan of Outpost Rush. I think the whole resource aspect of it makes it much worse than a traditional PvP mode for most players that want to play PvP. They were asked what kind of content is planned for the next 12 months, PvP or casual PvE. They said they want to do a lot of both. They have big plans for PvP in 2024. We talked about that now. And they also want to do a lot with PvE. They want to work on the storytelling and making the casual experience better. They can't provide information yet, as usual. The server Abaton specifically got changes to influence races with how they're scheduled, and the result apparently was that everyone just goes to the more important race now and the other one is kind of left behind, and it also messes up the time slots for people who can only play at specific times, and they were asked what they're going to do about that. They said they're testing different configurations and they're not hard committed to the current schedule, and they understand the dilemma and hear the feedback and are trying to figure that out. They were asked what the problem with the original Season 4 release was. They said there were issues with build testing which kind of sent them on a wild goose chase, but other problems caused later throughout the patch were caused by underlying code changes and tech improvements and were not tied to specific features of the patch, so while the patch didn't have that much on-the-surface content, this under-the-surface stuff affected it. They were not happy with how the release went, and they hope that the minor patch has now fixed all these stability issues. It took them a week, and that is unacceptable, they say, and they're looking to improve, and bottom line is they gotta do better, but we've heard that plenty of times before at this point. There was some more information about upcoming changes in content. The big question was, of course, why there's no new content from February to May, and the person writing it said they felt like they're being punked. So Scott said, well, there is new content, there's the 10-person trial, there's a new event, a new artifact, and so on and so on. He says there's not as much as you want, but no new content is an unfair statement. Now, I will say that I think that's more of a misinterpretation of what's being said here, because the no new content feeling comes from the fact that almost all of this was originally scheduled for Season 4. This was content that was already supposed to be in the game, that we were told would be in the game, and that was a schedule that they were very focused on and wanted to keep up, and then last second was like, oh, by the way, none of that is coming. That's now the content for the next season. I think that is why people are frustrated, and that's why that doesn't feel like new content, to me at least. Scott said the team is doing as much as they can, which once again to me indicates that they simply are understaffed, because if this is as much as they can do, then they probably need more people, which they're probably not getting from whoever is higher up and calling the shots for them. Serenity is already very strong as it is right now, so somebody wanted to know if Serenity will get a nerf, especially with the new attribute gauntlets that give you extra damage on heavy attacks. And they've agreed that Serenity is already relatively strong, especially in PvE, and they're looking into this going into Season 5, so there could be some changes there. Another question was if there are any plans to add more ways to get Chromatic Seals past the winter event. I guess this question was asked before Chromatic Seals were made not redundant, but much less important. But they did say they like adding things like Chromatic Seals or Dark Matter and so on to events. It's not going to be for every event, but they want to find fun ways to get these and make you explore the content at the same time, which I think is generally a good idea, encourages you to do the events. But the problem is that currently they're just stacking way too much into each individual event, and the events themselves are simply too boring. Killing the Winter Warrior hundreds of times just to farm stuff isn't very fun. And that's kind of what the rant post, the last one that they got as a question more or less, is also addressing, saying how the content with the Winter Warrior was actually reduced. And they talk about that in some interesting ways. So they said he has really been enjoying the winter event. And I gotta ask at this point, how? How has he really been enjoying the winter event? How does he enjoy zerging the same boss over and over with zero challenge or variety or anything attached to that? I don't believe that. I genuinely do not believe that this is an event that the vast majority of people enjoy. I do think there are some people out there that enjoy very, very, very repetitive activities where they just feel like they're doing something because they're getting a reward for it. But I think that's a very small portion of the player base. I think people are doing this as a chore because they want to get the rewards and they feel like they have to get them now. It's a fear of missing out there because everything is kind of time gated and everything, and you need a lot of these resources, but I don't think people are actually enjoying this. They say that you get new rewards and the activities are fun. They also understand that changing events halfway through the event itself is a bit dangerous. There were problems with the Yeti Zergs putting strain on the servers because there's been these huge Zergs just going around, and this changed version is a better pattern for most players. I quote here, "You don't want to kill 30 Yetis in a day, but kill 3 and amp up the rewards. So it's worth 5 times the original. Because otherwise it becomes work and not play." I fundamentally disagree with that. I think in both cases it is work. Either you zerg it over and over on the same day, at least you're kind of getting it done and you kind of have your group together. You don't need to get the group every time and find out where the Yeti is. You're kind of just zerging around together. Or you're doing it 3 times a day and then you log in again the next day to do it again and log in the next day to do it again. And you always have to make room for that activity on the day if you want to get the maximum rewards. I think either is definitely just work, not play, not fun, and I really don't understand how they interpret people doing this event as people having fun. Because it's very easy to measure fun considering this is an event we had in previous years. If this event was super fun, like for example Fresh Starter fun for a lot of players, then we would have seen a massive spike of returning players with Season 4. We did not see that at all. We saw a very minor uptick, which very clearly indicates that this event is not fun. In the future, they want to align the rewards with what works on the server earlier on and make sure it feels good for the average player. I think those goals are good, but they just need to figure out what a fun world event is in the first place. And again, world bosses that you can just zerg and skip all relevant mechanics over and over aren't fun. In the next days, we'll talk about artifact armors as well as Skull and Bones, so if you're interested in that, consider subscribing and clicking the bell. If you'd like to support me further, you can do that on Patreon and get early trading tips in return. Thanks to all of my patrons who already do exactly that. Thank you for watching. Sloth out.